My name is John.H.Watson. As the fellow lodging of Sherlock Holmes, I had witnessed the performance that he thrust the delicate needle home, pressed down the tiny piston, and sank back into the velvet-lined armchair with a long sigh of satisfaction. Such scene occurred 3 times a day for many months. From day to day I had become irritable at the sight. My conscience had not reconciled my mind to it. Again and again had registered a vow that I should deliver my soul upon the subject, but my companions still remained the cool, nonchalant air. This left me lacking the courage to protest and backward in crossing him. Yet upon that afternoon, my patience had reached its limit, and I felt that I could hold out no longer. "Count the cost," I said earnestly. "Your brain may, as you say, be roused and excited, but it is a pathological and morbid process, which involves increased tissue change, and may at last leave a permanent weakness. Why should you, for a mere passing pleasure, risk the loss of those great powers with which you have been endowed? Remember that I speak not only as one comrade to another, but as a medical man to one, for whose constitution he is to some extent answerable." Holmes did not seem offended. On the contrary, he put his fingertips together, and leaned his elbows on the arms of his chair, like one who has a relish for conversation.
My mind.
He smiled at my vehemence.
Rebels at stagnation. Give me problems, give me work, give me the most abstruse cryptogram, or the most intricate analysis, and I am in my own proper atmosphere. I can dispense then with artificial stimulants.
Would you think me impertinent if I were to put your theories to a more severe test? I replied, after a little thought.
On the contrary,
Holmes answered.
I should be delighted to look into any problem which you might submit to me.
I handed him over the watch, which had been recently cleaned, and I believed that Holmes couldn't discern the character or habits of the late owner. He balanced the watch in his hand, gazed hard at the dial, opened the back and examined the works, first with his naked eyes and then with a powerful convex lens.
There are hardly any data,
he remarked. You are right, I answered. There was some slight feeling of amusement in my heart. It was cleaned before being sent to me.
Though unsatisfactory, my research has not been entirely barren,
he observed, staring up at the ceiling with dreamy, lackluster eyes.
Subject to your correction, I should judge that the watch belonged to your elder brother, who inherited it from your father.
That you gather, no doubt, from the HW upon the back, said I. Anything else?
And then, he was a man of untidy habits, very untidy and careless. He was left with good prospects, but he threw away his chances, lived for some time in poverty with occasional short intervals of prosperity, and finally, taking to drink, he died. That is all I can gather.
I sprang from my chair and limped impatiently about the room, with considerable bitterness in my heart. I regret the injustice which I did you. I should have had more faith in your marvellous faculty. There was no doubt that my little puzzle could not trouble him at all, let alone prevent his further depravity. When, with a crisp knock, our landlady entered, bearing a card upon the brass salver.
A young lady for you, sir,
she said, addressing my companion.
Miss Mary Morstan.
He read.
I have no recollection of the name. Ask the young lady to step up, Mrs. Hudson. Don't go, doctor. I should prefer that you remain.
Miss Morstan entered the room with a firm step and an outward composure of manner. She was a charming lady, and she was recommended by her employer, Mrs. Cecil Forrester.
State your case,
said Holmes in brisk business tones.
Briefly,
she said.
The facts are these. My father was an officer in an Indian regiment. In the year 1878, my father telegraphed to me from London and directed me to come down at once. On reaching London, I was informed that Captain Morstan had gone out the night before and had not returned. I waited all day without news of him. That night, I communicated with the police, and next morning we advertised in all the papers. We even communicated with the only friend of my father, Major Sholto, but he did not even know that his brother officer was in England.
A singular case,
remarked Holmes.
I have not yet described to you the most singular part. About 6 years ago, an advertisement appeared in the Times asking for the address of Miss Mary Morstan. There was no name or address appended. I published my address in the advertisement column. The same day there arrived through the post a small cardboard box addressed to me, which I found to contain a very large and lustrous pearl. No word of writing was enclosed. Since then, every year upon the same date there has always appeared a similar box, containing a similar pearl.
She opened a flat box as she spoke, and showed me 6 of the finest pearls that I had ever seen.
Your statement is most interesting,
said Sherlock Holmes.
Has anything else occurred to you?
Yes, and that is why I have come to you. This morning I received this letter, which you will perhaps read for yourself.
Holmes rubbed his hands, and his eyes glistened. He leaned forward in his chair with an expression of extraordinary concentration upon his clear-cut, hawk-like features.
Be at the 3rd pillar from the left outside the Lyceum Theatre tonight at 7 o'clock. If you are distrustful, bring 2 friends. You are a wronged woman, and shall have justice. Do not bring police. If you do, all will be in vain. Your unknown friend.
That's all the content in the letter. She hopes that we can accompany her to the appointment. We naturally agreed with pleasure.
There is one other point, however. Is this handwriting the same as that upon the pearl box addresses?
Holmes said.
I have them here.
Miss Morstan answered, producing half a dozen pieces of paper. My companion spread out the papers upon the table, and gave little darting glances from one to the other.
They are disguised hands, except the letter,
he said presently.
They are undoubtedly by the same person. Pray allow me to keep the papers. I may look into the matter before then.
Soon after Miss Morstan left, my companion also went out to investigate, which also relieved me, knowing that he wouldn't continue his self-destructive behavior anymore. I sat in the window and my thoughts couldn't help but ran upon the figure of Miss Morstan. As I said, she was an attractive woman. Could we secure her rights, would change from a needy governess to the richest heiress in England. What was I, an army surgeon with a weak leg and a weaker banking account, that I should dare to think of such things?
There is no great mystery in this matter.
After Holmes returned, he said in a bright, eager mood, and in excellent spirits, "What, you have solved it already?"
Well, that would be too much to say. The details are still to be added. I have just found, consulting the back files of the Times, that Major Sholto.
I may be very obtuse, Holmes, but I fail to see what this suggests.
No? You surprise me. Look at it in this way, then. Captain Morstan disappears. The only person in London whom he could have visited is Major Sholto. Major Sholto denies having heard that he was in London. For years later, Sholto dies. Within a week of his death, Captain Morstan's daughter receives a valuable present, which is repeated from year to year, and now culminates in a letter which describes her as a wronged woman. Why? Unless it is that Sholto's heir knows something of the mystery and desires to make compensation.
But what a strange compensation, and how strangely made. Why, too, should he write a letter now, rather than 6 years ago?
Our expedition of tonight will solve them all,
said Sherlock Holmes pensively.
Ah, here is a four-wheeler, and Miss Morstan is inside. Are you all ready?
I picked up my hat and my heavy stick, but I observed that Holmes took his revolver from his drawer and slipped it into his pocket. It was clear that he thought that our night's work might be a serious one.
Major Sholto was a very particular friend of Papa's.
Miss Morstan readily answered the few additional questions.
He and Papa were in command of the troops at the Andaman Islands, so they were thrown a great deal together. By the way, a curious paper was found in Papa's desk which no one could understand. I thought you might care to see it, so I brought it with me. It is here.
It has at some time been pinned to a board.
Holmes unfolded and examined the paper carefully.
The diagram upon it appears to be a plan of part of a large building with numerous halls, corridors, and passages. At one point is a small cross done in red ink, and above it is 3.37 from left in faded pencil writing. In the left-hand corner is a curious hieroglyphic like for crosses in a line with their arms touching. Beside it is written, in very rough and coarse characters, the sign of the four, Jonathan Small, Mahomet Singh, Abdullah Khan, Dust Akbar.
It was in his pocketbook that we found it.
Preserve it carefully, then, Miss Morstan, for it may prove to be of use to us. I begin to suspect that this matter may turn out to be much deeper and more subtle than I at first supposed. I must reconsider my ideas.
He leaned back in the cab, and I could see by his drawn brow and his vacant eye that he was thinking intently. He held his open notebook upon his knee, and from time to time he jotted down figures and memoranda in the light of his pocket lantern. We had hardly reached the third pillar, which was our rendezvous, before a small, dark, brisk man in the dress of a coachman accosted us.
"Are you the parties who come with Miss Morstan?"
He asked.
I am Miss Morstan, and these two gentlemen are my friends,
said she. After Miss Morstan assured him that Holmes and I were not police officers, he gave a shrill whistle, on which a street Arab led across a four-wheeler and opened the door. As soon as we had taken our places inside, the driver immediately whipped up his horse, and we plunged away at a furious pace through the foggy streets. At first I had some idea as to the direction in which we were driving, but soon I lost my bearings. Sherlock Holmes was never at fault, however, and he muttered the corresponding names as the cab rattled through squares and in and out by tortuous by-streets. When we finally met the fellow who had requested this meeting, everything was exactly as Holmes had deduced. The mysterious one was indeed the heir of Major Sholto, Mr. Thaddeus Sholto, a small man with the high, shining head.
"I can give you every information,"
said he.
"In the first place, I must tell you that there are several points in the story of which I am myself ignorant. I can only lay the facts before you as far as I know them myself. My twin brother Bartholomew and I were the only children. Our father, Major John Sholto, was once of the Indian Army. He retired some 11 years ago and came to live at Pondicherry Lodge in Upper Norwood. He had prospered in India and brought back with him a considerable sum of money, a large collection of valuable curiosities, and a staff of native servants. With these advantages, he bought himself a house and lived in great luxury. We did know, however, that some mystery, some positive danger, overhung our father. He was very fearful of going out alone, and would never tell us what it was he feared. But he had a most marked aversion to men with wooden legs."
Mr. Thaddeus Sholto applied a taper to the great bowl, and the smoke bubbled merrily through the rose-water.
"Early in 1882 my father received a letter from India which was a great shock to him. He nearly fainted at the breakfast table when he opened it, and from that day he sickened to his death. What was in the letter we could never discover, but I could see as he held it that it was short and written in a scrawling hand. Towards the end of April we were informed that he was beyond all hope, and that he wished to make a last communication to us. I shall try and give it to you in his own very words.
"I will tell you how Morstan died,"
my father continued.
"When in India, he and I, through a remarkable chain of circumstances, came into possession of a considerable treasure. I brought it over to England, and on the night of Morstan's arrival, he came straight over here to claim his share. Morstan and I had a difference of opinion as to the division of the treasure, and we came to heated words. Morstan had sprung out of his chair in a paroxysm of anger, when he suddenly pressed his hand to his side. His face turned a dusky hue, and he fell backwards, cutting his head against the corner of the treasure chest. When I stooped over him, I found, to my horror, that he was dead."
At the short account of her father's death, Miss Morstan had turned deadly white, and for a moment I feared that she was about to faint. To be honest, I could have struck the small man across the face, so hot was I at this callous and off-hand reference to so delicate a matter. Mr. Thaddeus Sholto responded to my anger with a smile.
"I am so glad to have your friends here, not only as an escort to you, but also as witnesses to what I am about to do and say."
Mr. Sholto said to Miss Morstan, who had rallied.
I can do you justice, and I will too, whatever Brother Bartholomew may say. For now, let's return to my father's story.
For a long time, I sat half distracted, wondering what I should do,
He said, in a voice which was broken as much by emotion as by pain.
My fault lies in the fact that I concealed not only the body, but also the treasure, and that I have clung to Morstan's share as well as to my own. See that chaplet tipped with pearls beside the quinine bottle. Even that I could not bear to part with, although I had got it out with the design of sending it to poor Morstan's orphan. You, my sons, will give her a fair share of the agate treasure. Now, put your ears down to my mouth. The treasure is hidden in.
At this instant a horrible change came over his expression, and he yelled, in a voice which I can never forget,
Keep him out! For Christ's sake, keep him out!
We both stared round at the window behind us upon which his gaze was fixed. A face was looking in at us out of the darkness. It was a bearded, hairy face, with wild, cruel eyes and an expression of concentrated malevolence. My brother and I rushed towards the window, but the man was gone. When we returned to my father, his head had dropped and his pulse had ceased to beat. We searched the garden at night, but found no sign of the intruder, save that just under the window a single footmark was visible in the flower bed. The window of my father's room was found open in the morning. His cupboards and boxes had been rifled, and upon his chest was fixed a torn piece of paper, with the words the sign of the force scrawled across it. My brother and I naturally associated this peculiar incident with the fear which haunted my father during his life, but it is still a complete mystery to us. My brother and I,
said he,
were, as you may imagine, much excited as to the treasure which my father had spoken of. For weeks and for months we dug and delved in every part of the garden without discovering its whereabouts. It was maddening to think that the hiding place was on his very lips at the moment that he died. We could judge the splendor of the missing riches by the chaplet which he had taken out.
We had all sat absorbed, listening to his extraordinary narrative. Mr. Thaddeus Sholto looked from one to the other of us with an obvious pride at the effect which his story had produced.
By the way, over this chaplet, my brother and I had some little discussion.
He glanced to Miss Morstan and said,
It was all that I could do to persuade him to let me find out Miss Morstan's address and send her a detached pearl at fixed intervals, so that at least she might never feel destitute.
It was a kindly thought.
said our companion earnestly.
It was extremely good of you.
The little man waved his hand deprecatingly.
Though Brother Bartholomew could not altogether see it in that light. Our difference of opinion on this subject went so far that I thought it best to set up rooms for myself. So I left Pondicherry Lodge, taking the old Kitmagar and Williams with me. Yesterday, however, I learned that an event of extreme importance has occurred. The treasure has been discovered. I instantly communicated with Miss Morstan, and it only remains for us to drive out to Norwood and demand our share.
Mr. Thaddeus Sholto ceased, when our thoughts upon the new development which the mysterious business had taken. Our cab was awaiting us outside, and our programme was evidently prearranged, for the driver started off at once at a rapid pace. Thaddeus Sholto talked incessantly, in a voice which rose high above the rattle of the wheels.
How do you think he found out where the treasure was?
Said he.
He worked out all the cubic space of the house, and made measurements everywhere, so that not 1 inch should be unaccounted for. Then he confirmed that there were 4 feet of space in the house disappeared. These could only be at the top of the building, and there, sure enough, he came upon a little garret which had been sealed up and was known to no one. In the center stood the treasure chest. He lowered it through the hole, and there it lies. He computes the value of the jewels at not less than £500,000 sterling.
At the mention of this gigantic sum we all stared at one another open-eyed. No one knew what the others thought about this substantial amount of money. However that may be, we were certainly relieved when our cab pulled up with a jerk, and the coachman sprang down to open the door.
This, Miss Morstan, is Pondicherry Lodge,
said Mr. Thaddeus Sholto, as he handed her out. I am truly grateful for the appearance of Miss Mary Morstan. Her case transformed the dejected Holmes, who had complained bitterly about the commonplaceness of life, back into the Sherlock Holmes I knew. However, the way he leans back in his chair with glittering eyes makes me feel nervous. Perhaps this case is about to undergo some changes that will catch everyone off guard.